Yes, this is John from All Points TV, and today we have Laurel Fetterbush coming in here and talking with us. Laurel Fetterbush, if you stop in and see us at various times, you're going to see Laurel coming in. She's both a performer, a harpist, as well as a writer, and also you draw from so many places, and you have a book on so many different subjects. I mean, I'm going to just flash them up here. You have about asexuality. You have the romantic and sex life, the life and sex life of our aromantic asexual. We have one on the flat Earth. We have one on matriarchs and why the matriarchs of the Bible, the Jewish tradition, the Old Testament, what the Christians call the Old Testament, why they would reject abortion. Also, no matter how it is literally just a dream. And so I think there's 7 books total. I think I'll pull up a couple more here. And also, neuter is a gender identity. Got to squeeze here between 2 other books because you got so many. It's hard to get them all on here and show them all. So anyway, today we're talking though about the most recent book, Weaponized People, and we'll go into that right now. And anyway, anybody wants to, I would suggest, picking up this book. I mean, because it's like any of your books, because it just seems like you have something to say about so many different areas. I mean, that's what kind of. And I don't.
Just one thing. People don't have to agree with me on all of the topics to agree or to none of my books demands that you agree with me on any of the other topics. So, hopefully, if some people might be interested in the things I'm saying today, it doesn't matter if you believe any of the things I'm saying about some of these other topics. They're all sort of controversial, and I'm surprised if I realize that very few people would agree with me on lots of them. So you don't necessarily have to be with me on all these other things in order to be interested in what I'm saying today or in any of the other books. Like each one is sort of its own thing, so they don't demand you be with me on the whole picture.
Right, because you're all over the place. I mean, you're kind of a liberal in some things politically, but then you're very vehemently seem to oppose abortion, which is basically seems to be the cause that the left is identified with. Allowing for abortions and not have any kind of issues with it, or very few issues with it. But this most recent book to me, I mean, when we first started talking about it, it never dawned on me what you were aiming at, because I heard rumblings about what we're talking about, but it was like you seem to grab hold of it really quickly and see this with the election of Donald Trump. You saw this as kind of an alarming thing in a way.
Yeah, it's well, how I got into this topic was I have Facebook friends of all different political persuasions, but one of my Facebook friends posted a video on my timeline, and he was supporting this video, and it was actually a neo-Nazi thing, and it was by this woman, Lana Lotkeff. She's a Swedish anti-Semite, very prominent radio personality there, and she's married to this guy Henrik Palmgren. They're both anti-Semite white supremacists, and I was just kind of alarmed by this kind of neo-Nazi video. At first I thought maybe she was satirizing it, or just making fun of the ideas, but no, I mean that's sort of what she's all about. She and her husband. So I was sort of appalled by it, and I actually unfriended this guy. In a way, I'm kind of sorry I did, because sometimes you can learn a lot from the people that you don't agree with, and you might want obviously I learned a lot by knowing about this this anti-Semitic angle, and like if you're only around the people you agree with, and it's like an echo chamber and you don't learn anything. But anyway, I was appalled by this, but it also, kind of was fascinating that there were these hate groups that are actually speaking out, and, they're not hidden anymore. And I mean, I don't know if they ever were, but at least I'm becoming aware of how much they're speaking out. And so I started looking into some of their videos and their writings. This particular the couple has a sort of a franchise, Red Ice Productions and Red Ice Radio, and I started looking into their writings and some of the writings of the people related to them, and they started in one place I saw them mention this Eurasian land bridge. That doesn't sound like a hate group kind of thing, but like I saw that in one place, and then I saw it in another some other hate group writing somewhere. And so like it just sort of stuck out to me, well, what's this Eurasian land bridge all about? And I started looking into that. And that's how I came upon this. And this is actually a very big issue. I mean, it's sort of a geopolitical issue. And I'm not really someone who's an expert on geopolitics, but this is something that I think everyone needs to know about. This is how Russia and China are trying to unify the countries of Central Asia and become the world's dominant continent. And, that's obviously the big threat to us in the United States and to the entire world, I think.
Now, we're not just talking just sheer economics or use of the access to raw materials. I mean, what I've seen from you kind of been stimulated my thinking, so I went and bought the book by Alexander Dugin.
Yeah,
and
right.
The Russian thinker and Russian political scientist. How would you classify him?
Well, he's a philosopher, is how he's mainly referred to.
Yeah, and he basically. So I can see though where you're kind of where you can see you have some issues because I mean, basically this is kind of to use an overused term. It's like basically a transition from where the United States and the system that the United States has probably inherited or was created for the United States at the end of the Second World War, being a very dominant, global power. Mm-hmm. And you kind of summed it up before. Basically, it's like what we have currently is called, it could refer to as globalism, for good, for bad, for the detractors, for the supporters. It's called, we refer to it as globalism, where this is totally kind of where they want the center focus to be in another region of the world, which would probably translate also into a different kind of worldview and perspective of individual rights, of freedoms, the ideas of equality and stuff that we've actually yearned and pushed for as the United States across the globe. Now that's a kind of a challenge, being challenged. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, and I think usually the way it's presented is, that you can be a globalist or a nationalist or you can support globalism or reject it, but one thing they don't talk about, or it's written about in a few journals here and there, but it's not widely known about, is that it's actually a choice between globalism and Eurasianism. There isn't, it's one or the other. One or the other of those two is going to be dominant in the world. So that's what the choice really is. And I might not ordinarily be a big supporter of globalism. Which is actually basically just the idea of seeing the world as interconnected, and it's being in favor of democracy and against imperialism, and it wants some kind of world government oversight. But there still would be the countries wouldn't change. It's just that there is this other layer of world government on top for when each country by itself isn't sufficient. And I don't agree with everything that everyone says in the name of globalism, but the alternative to that is Eurasianism. Now, globalism is based on the United States and maybe Great Britain and the Western worldview of things, which is individual rights and freedoms, our Constitution, and this Eurasianism has none of those things. It's very scary. I don't think anyone would say that Russia and China have been great champions of people's rights. They're actually Alexander Dugin, who's the intellectual father of this Eurasianism idea. It didn't really start with him, but he's the main purveyor of it right now. But he speaks against the idea of liberal democracy, which he sees as being imported from the West, and against individual rights. It's more of a conformist kind of ideology. It's anti-gay rights, anti-women's rights, and a lot of the supporters of Eurasianism are into the idea of racist ethno-states, especially white ethno-states. That would be like a country just for white people. And even though the Eurasianist writings themselves don't necessarily talk about that, a lot of the main supporters of Eurasianism right now are into that kind of thing. And a lot of the Eurasianist writings are also subtly anti-Semitic. They talk about how the Russians are an Aryan people. The Nazis were into their Aryan racial heritage. And so Eurasianism is based on this idea of their Aryan heritage. And so I think that this is a very scary development.
Yeah, see, I can see the realignment's happening. I mean, I think for just the struggle for the access to natural resources, I can see where China and Russia. Again, we used to refer to the Soviet Union. Now it's primarily the Soviet Union. The former states of what we used to call the Soviet Union still exist, but Russia itself actually was the major force that unified the people into those other countries into the Soviet Union. We're giving a little bit of background information because we have maybe you have millennials listening. And after the decay, or basically the collapse of the Soviet system, I mean, basically there's still there's kind of a vacuum in many of these countries, that I see. I mean, we don't hear that much about what's going on in some countries because a lot of times this is simply not being covered in the press. So
we don't know that a lot of these countries exist.
Right.
Like a lot of the countries I've seen writings about, the countries near Russia have names that I've never heard of before. It's just we're not that familiar with that part of the world.
I forget. I used to know this, but how many ethnic groups and linguistically, there's so many other hundreds of, how many hundreds of languages, a couple, maybe 100 some languages in the area we used to refer to as the Soviet Union.
Right.
And the biggest thing, the one that controlled the whole thing, basically sat on top of everybody, was with all their ethnic prejudices and racial strife and all that, was the powerful Soviet system, the government of that. Basically, they held everybody else down. And now there's like a resurgence and a possibility of like ethnic reassertion of ethnic roles and ethnic identities. And so I can see I don't see how that's escapable, because I mean they were part of this system, was repressive for so long. Now it's going to be kind of a recreation, maybe even of something that didn't have really basis in reality for these new these identities, but they're trying to go overboard and to compensate for the diminished sense of identity they had during the time of the Soviet Union.
Right. Yeah. I'm glad you brought up identity. There's this word that you might see if you look into these kinds of issues: identitarian or identitarianism. And that's the idea that each race needs its own state, its own area, that the races should not be together. And the people who support this idea make a point of saying, "Oh no, we're not saying that we're superior or inferior to any other race. It's not a matter of superiority. It's just saying that each race should be separate." And I think that's a really terrible and scary idea. And, well, for one thing, it often does lead to, genocides. And they might say it doesn't mean that they think they're superior, but that's where it leads to. And actually, I think the world's wedge issue right now, like, we're used to wedge issues in the United States, dividing lines, like, like abortion could be a wedge issue. You're pro-choice or, pro-life. There are other wedge issues like gun control or, immigrant rights or things like that. But anyway, the way I see it right now, the world's wedge issue, the thing that's dividing the world right now is the idea of multiculturalism, whether you're for that or against that. And I think we really need to be for that, the idea of multiculturalism, the idea that people of different cultures, different races, different religious views can coexist and in a peaceful, harmonious way. I think that's something we need to strive for. And, of course, we don't have that perfectly in this country. I don't think any place has it perfectly, but a lot of the time, I think most of us have friends who are of different races and our colleagues, people we respect and have learned from of different races, different ethnicities. And, if we want to keep having a world like that where you can relate to people who aren't exactly like you racially, I think we have to support globalism, because that's the side of globalism, is the idea of multiculturalism and tolerance. And this Eurasianism is completely the opposite.
Now, I can see now the subtitle of your book, Weaponized People, is Trump's Eurasian Army of Trolls.
Right, yeah.
Now, do you think, from basically, I'm going to say this because, it'll probably anger some people because Trump, to me, basically, he was a lifelong Democrat. I always want to get that distance in there. He was a lifelong Democrat until he decided to run for president.
Yeah, that's fine with me because, I'm a Democrat now, but very recent, I was a Republican until Donald Trump was elected. So I still have some Republican sensibilities.
But see, what I'd like to know, though, is do you see Donald Trump as being a willing participant of this kind of polarization or the struggle? Or do you think he just basically, what he says resonates well with the people?
I think that he and his people are deliberately playing into that. Well, I guess let me talk about the issue. I think many of you have heard about the idea of the Russian cyber attacks. Russia hacking into our computers and influencing our election, or at least whether you agree that they did or not. That I'm sure that you've heard those allegations, and I think it's our intelligence people say that they have done it. Maybe it hasn't been proven yet to what degree things were or were not influenced, but we know that Russia hacked into some of the computers, and that's called cyber warfare when a sort of a hostile country uses computers against our country to influence things, and but one aspect of this cyber warfare thing, which I don't think has been examined, at least I watch Rachel Maddow and other people who are talking about these Russian cyber attacks, is the development of online internet cults that is a way of rallying these internet trolls who hack into computers and harass political opponents and things like that, and they're actually motivated by these online cults. There are two specific ones that I came upon. We're talking about Trump. I was curious about why some people would seem to see him as a god or a sort of divine figure, and I thought at first maybe it was some evangelical types putting out that idea, and maybe some of them are, but one thing I came upon in studying that was these internet memes, like people calling him a God Emperor, God Emperor Trump. That seems kind of bizarre. And where that comes from is a computer meme. Meme, you might know, is a recurrent computer image. It comes from, is it Warhammer 40,000? It's an internet game, but there's a character called the God Emperor, and people started identifying the God Emperor with Donald Trump. And then there's another computer meme, which is Pepe the Frog, which you might have seen, and you might be familiar that Pepe the Frog has been sort of co-opted by the alt-right. It was originally just sort of a non-political internet meme, but alt-right people started using him in their, in their propaganda kinds of things. But there was a cult that sort of sprung up around Pepe the Frog because there were some sort of coincidental internet things, and I'm not a tech person, so I don't quite understand exactly all the intricacies of it, but somehow they related this Pepe the Frog character with this Egyptian god, Kek, is a god of chaos. He's a frog man, kind of, he's a head of a frog, and so they started thinking that this Pepe the Frog internet meme was actually sort of an avatar of some Egyptian god. And that also got tied in with Donald Trump, because there were some coincidences related to this Pepe character, also related to Donald Trump. So they started thinking, in this internet cult, Pepe the Frog and this Kek, Egyptian god, and Donald Trump are all related. And I think that Donald Trump was actually signaling to these Pepe the Frog people, like in the debates, you might have seen he'd sometimes make funny faces, like he'd contort his face to make it look like a frog, and you might think he's just clowning around, but I think he was doing it very deliberately, making his face look like a frog because he wanted to play up that angle of things. So.
See, I'm sitting here talking to you about this, and I can see where some people have suspicion because Donald Trump's married two different women, I think it was, Melania, who is his current wife and is his first wife. Oh God, and her name escapes me. Ivanka.
Okay.
Yeah, they're both
Ivanka's the daughter.
Daughter, yeah. Well, I forget to. But anyway, his first wife is also from Eastern Europe.
Right. Yeah.
Eastern or Central Europe or Russia or whatever. So I mean, he seems to have this appreciation for Slavic womanhood, anyway. But so I can understand some people think he's sympathetic, but he also has at least one son-in-law who is Jewish.
Right. Yeah.
And
Jared Kushner. Yeah.
Yeah, Kushner. So I mean, I don't see how he is like this kind of I don't know what the stance is. I mean, his son-in-law might be Jewish, but he might not be also on board for the globalism like it's going on, which usually most Jews, who are secular, identify with. They have appreciation. That's what they want to strive for, is kind of more of a blended world. And so I can see where some people have some kind of aversion to his kind of connections through Eastern Europe. And let's face it, we grew up at the very end of the the Cold War. Yeah, I mean, both of us are within the same age brackets, within the same age areas, and we have this aversion to anything from that part of the world. I mean, we do. We have it, which I think is weird, because a lot of people in this country who are on the left used to basically tell us when they were more of a threat or sinister threat with the nuclear possibilities that they were offering up. They were always saying how we were overreactive and we were paranoid about the Soviet Union, what they represented, and how much evil they would really be intended on doing. And now it's the left here because I think the right, they see the Russia now, because they're emerging as the leadership of the former Soviet Union, because that's where the power was actually centered from, was Russia in the first place. Now there's like a reassertion of a national identity. And maybe they see that reassertion is going to cause some exaggerated fears and exaggerated actions on the behalf of Russia. So I mean, but it's kind of odd how what used to be considered, if you had any aversions or you didn't really appreciate you stated you had some kind of aversions or some kind of fear of the Soviet Union, those on the left here would actually mock you. But now they're the ones. Now they're the ones seem to be screaming that there's such a threat. So it just it seems kind of weird coming from them, because
it's hard. A lot of these things don't fit very neatly into the way we think of the left versus or the right. Those categories aren't always so helpful. Like in the things I'm saying now, in some ways it's kind of leftist because I'm supporting globalism and I'm against Trump. But in some ways maybe that it's a right-wing thing because it's sort of being alarmist about Russia. So that's typically a right-wing thing. So
I can see I'm, like I said, I never disliked Russia all that much. Even though my mom's family had family still living in Hungary at the time. And that was ruled basically by the Soviet Union, and it was pretty, draconian by our considerations of, government. And so but I never had this fear of the Soviet Union or Russia or the Russians like a lot of Americans did.
Right.
But
I actually love a lot of things about Russian culture. Like, I'm a musician. I tend to love Russian music. A lot of my favorite composers are Russian composers, and my favorite authors are the Russian authors. And I have some Russian Jewish ancestry. I guess the Jews weren't really, they were kind of segregated in their own area. They weren't part of the mainstream Russian culture, but I still think that maybe, I still maybe genetically inherited some love for the things that are Russian, just by my ancestors being in that part of the world, because it often resonates with me. Like the music is much more passionate and emotional, and, same thing, the writing too. There's something about it I can really relate to.
So it's interesting though that you've actually. I mean, I had when we were talking about it. You mentioned Dugin, and so I went and got the book by one of the books by Dugin, and started looking through it. And I'm saying, it's like you just have this ability to take snippets of stuff, then move with it, and you seem to recognize patterns or see a threat or see a thread that should be investigated further. And you being a musician, some people would say basically just want to say that's probably the end. That should be the area where you'd concentrate, or what it's expected would be. But I mean, your willingness, and it says this year. I started reading some of that stuff and remembered our conversation about this. And
he's actually not an easy guy to read, so I'm impressed that you were able to read it. I mean, I haven't read.
Well, of course, it was an English translation. I don't want anybody to think I can read Russian.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah.
But I can't read Russian. But
even in the translation, though, it's pretty heavy.
It's like Yeah, I was just amazed when you were talking about that, because I was reflecting on that conversation, and I started reading this, and I started seeing more things on the internet about Eurasianism and this opposition to the thing spearheaded basically America, for good or bad or for what its desire or not. At the end of the Second World War, the United States did become the de facto leader of the free world, quote unquote, whatever that was, and largely I see it as a continuity because I see England and France, despite the many obviously faults and flaws both of those countries possess, the striving that they had and the outcome of the movements and of the drastic, horrific, brutal murders and killings and but the fruit of that actually was carried forward into this country. And we saw when we formed our government, we wanted to avoid much of what our founders saw going on with Europe. And now it's like and basically, the reason why we became the de facto leader of the free world because Europe was in turmoil. There was no safe refuge because of distance at that point. Now, this would not happen because of the distance between Europe and the United States. It was so vast. Very few. They didn't really have the ability to strike at us, with the weaponry at that point. Now, like I said, that's totally gone. That barrier is totally gone. But because we become like the receptor, we were like the depositories of the hopes and fears and the good or the bad of our European ancestors. And I think that's one thing the Europeans have a tendency trying to say, that's you and this is us. And I can't believe how much of a murder rate you guys have in the United States. And you guys are so violent. And I'm sitting here, I'm 54. I remember hearing stories about World War II when I was a kid, because I had a lot of friends and family members who had fought in that war, those battles in those wars. And I'm saying, you arrogant fops, you could have us a lecture about violence, and you have butchered each other for any conceivable reason a human can come up for killing another human. So don't, this arrogance, I always thought was I'm dismayed by that arrogance.
Right.
And this disconnect of like what we are is partly because you were our parents. And that's what I have like real issue with when I speak to Europeans.
Yeah, I guess any of these things aren't monoliths. Like the Europeans, I guess some of them would support this Eurasianism, and some of them would support globalism, depending on what country they're in, and also what their politics are. But there's the European Economic Union that Trump and other people are trying to downplay. And there's also this Eurasian Economic Union, which you might not have heard about, but that's another thing they're trying to, I guess it's Russia and China are trying to do, but I guess they're trying to enlist the support of some of these other European countries. So that's another development. So, I hope that the European countries will stay with the European Union as opposed to the Eurasianism.
Well, see, my friend, when we talked about this first a couple of weeks ago, then we're anticipating the first interview, which we did, but because of technical difficulties, we had to redo. I had just talked to you, and I was talking to a friend that night, and he said, "Do you know that there is a bridge or a connection between North Korea and what we would consider the former Soviet Union?" So I came over to the studio the next day, and I have a huge world map up on the wall, and I went, "Wow, he's right."
Yeah, that's part of this whole thing. There's this one bridge, one road, or OBOR, sometimes shortened to. It's also sometimes called the New Silk Road, but there are all kinds of sort of infrastructure initiatives like that, trying to unite the Europe and Asia with railroads and sea routes and things like that. And those things are very, very dangerous. And the United Nations, which you might think would be a very globalist entity, isn't necessarily taking sides in this. Like, I think the United Nations is often supportive of these initiatives, but this is something that we really need to be alarmed about, I think. And was it but Donald Trump, by not supporting the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, during the election, I had no idea what that was about. I didn't know what he was going on and on about. But apparently, by not supporting that, he was really supporting the integration of Europe and Asia by going along with the OB, one bridge, one road view of things. The TPP was more of an aligned with with the United States and our allies, and by getting rid of that, he was supporting Eurasianism. And another thing about the Eurasianists, they're developing their own currency, which is called the Alton, and it's gold-based, as a gold standard. So that's a way of weakening the American dollar and our influence in that whole part of the world. If we can't exert economic sanctions on any places or any kind of economic influence, then they're much stronger.
See, I know that some people say there's a good side. I mean, everything. I mean, we don't like to see the drastic change, but some people say basically, as everything develops, you can see opportunities. I mean, you've heard that much used adage before. It's like the same word for threat is also the same word for opportunity in whether Chinese or Japanese. So basically, they see there's a threat, but there's also an upside to this too. I mean, the Americans could say that by basically reducing the role of the American dollar, some people refer to it as a petrodollar.
Yeah, I've seen that.
But that now America doesn't have to engage itself into wars and it can concentrate on its own issues internally, which I think is that's optimistic to say that. I'd like to see that happen, but I just basically see we would not be able to let go so easily and I don't think the world will let us go, off the hook that much.
Well, I think that, a lot of people say we can't be the world's policeman, we should concentrate on our own country. I guess I think is the analogy of a policeman, like, what if all the good policemen just went home, or if there weren't any police, what do you think would happen? Do you be able to just go home and be safe and live your life? I mean, I think that we really need to be the world's policeman, because if we're not, it's going to be Russia and China. It's going to be these people who have no concerns about freedom or individual rights. And I think that's very dangerous to think we can just be isolationist and things will go on just fine. I think we really need to be the world's policeman, and I think we need to keep some kind of just moral order in the world. I don't think it'll happen if we're not the ones doing it.
See, I like, there's certain things about Putin that I find interesting. I can just say he's an interesting person.
Yeah, he's interesting. I'll give you that.
I don't know where he's going. I mean, I basically cannot read him because he says and does things. A lot of people, like I guess he was really advocated and actually supplied money to build a lot of the Orthodox churches and rebuild a lot of Orthodox churches throughout Russia. Some people see that some religious leaders see that as a signaling of embracing or re-embracing of the Christian value system.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you brought that up. Because one of the interesting things about Eurasianism, I'll have to look into that more. I think I might, because I'm still researching these topics, I might write another book after this, if I learn enough. But I guess Russia is trying to consolidate the churches, and so you'd think that they were big supporters of Christianity. But another aspect is they're also courting some of these neo-paganists, who apparently are becoming more prominent in the world. You might have seen some of those programs on like the History Channel late at night when they talk about Adolf Hitler's strange occult beliefs or the occult influences of the Nazis, and talk about the Old Norse gods and people worshiping them. And it sounds so sounds really esoteric and kind of strange, but there are movements to do away with Judeo-Christianity and go back to Norse. Well, Norse mythology is the main one that's into these white separatist, white nationalist movements. There might be other kinds of mythology too, but sort of this idea of going back to the ancient gods and doing away with Judeo-Christianity altogether. And Judeo-Christianity is where we get a lot of our moral, our ideas about morals and ethics from, not that you have to be religious to be an ethical person, but that's that's where our value systems generally come from. And, I think that it's not just a religious thing. It's, if you don't think that, killing another person is wrong, just basic things that we take for granted that everyone believes, if you're going to go back to some completely alien system of ethics and morals, I think that's where it's leading to.
Yeah, because I can, and I know I'll probably get a lot of reaction on this, because I know that there's people out there that consider themselves atheist, and they think their way of not having any kind of superstition, what they see religion as being a superstition, is a great thing. But the thing is, basically, I can defend my position, because I do believe in a God. I do believe in, that Christianity is probably a major force in the world, and for a positive way in many ways. Mm-hmm. Also, there's also some very negative things that were allowed to develop out of it. But I just basically simply, in a folk-like matter, would say, if you want to jettison religion, you're basically throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right. So that's another way that, like we're talking about left versus right, how these things don't fit neatly into any one category, because these, I guess, a lot of these Eurasianists would fall into what we call the alt-right right now, but it's sort of one of these places where the far left and the far right would probably meet, because the idea of being hostile towards Judeo-Christian ideals, that could be a far left idea or a far right idea. The idea that religion isn't important, or Judeo-Christian religion at least isn't important, and the idea of embracing paganism, that could either be this far right or far left idea too. So it's not neatly one or the other.
Yeah, because I see this as a problem, because I can see problems. Like I said, I can see where Eurasia actually I can't see it as being so much like some people would see it as a nationalistic endeavor or possibility, because there's so many, like we already alluded to, there's so many ethnic groups within the former Soviet Union. Right. There's so many ethnic groups within what we just properly refer to as Russia.
Right.
So I think there is already at play there many of the concepts or ideas that the globalists are building on or wish to aim for already there.
Mm-hmm.
There's it just can go. It depends on the leadership that emerges.
Yeah, I agree. My mom and I visited Russia years ago, and one of the things I remember was it did seem kind of multicultural, because I guess the Soviet Union had conquered a lot of different countries, and there were countries in Africa that were controlled by the Soviet Union, so we saw a lot of black people there, or different races, and there were some races that maybe it's not necessarily that their skin color was different from any race that you'd see here, but like their facial features were very different from a lot of the people you'd see. So it seemed like there are some races in the world that that you'd see a whole lot of different diversity of different kinds of people there, and so I think Russia has the potential to be a very multicultural place, and probably in many situations it is.
Yeah, because in my own bloodline, I have the Germanic Germanic groups. I have my great grandparents are from Prussia. The other one was from more central or Germany. My mom's family is Hungarian. My dad's family is Scottish, Dutch, Irish, English, Swede. My mom's family they did the genetic testing on one of my cousins, and they found out her bloodline comes from the oldest existing group in Hungary at the
Yeah.
So we definitely, and the Hungarians are Eurasian themselves. Because they're European Asian mix right there.
Right.
So
I'm not against Eurasian people. I don't want anyone to get this idea. It's this Eurasianist movement, or sometimes they call it Eurasist movement. That's what I'm being alarmed about.
I never took that either. I never took you have this aversion to but it would basically, what everybody comes in with a new mix and with a new set of ideologies or ideas that they're trying to reconcile, or or a few are just trying to dominate. Mm-hmm. There's a whole plethora of possibilities coming out of that struggle itself from that war part of the world. Then you fought that with it's basically like hot and cold air. You basically might create a tornado.
Right.
So you don't know how far this goes, or how far these people are willing to go to try to get their ideology, their beliefs, their identity established more firmly. You just don't know how they can go.
Yeah, that's very scary. And it's not like they're all in agreement. Like the white nationalists, not all of them are totally gung-ho about Eurasianism. I guess they'd prefer that to globalism, but they really want white ethno-states. So I'm not sure if they're so crazy about this Asian part of the Eurasian picture. And that's one interesting thing I found out about their Asian Aryans. I guess those are people who want to unite the Asians and the Aryan races against everyone else, and but it's sort of, they're lamenting that they're not more widely accepted in the Aryan movement, that so they feel like they're discriminated against in their quest to discriminate against other people. I just find that kind of ironic, but anyway, there are different varieties of these ethnic supremacist kinds of groups, and they're gaining a lot of prominence in the world right now, and it's really scary.
See, identity politics it's a double-edged sword. I mean, you want people to have this idea about themselves that have these positive attributes, hardworking, willingness to learn, willingness to do this, whatever. But then there's a negative aspect to it too. It's exclusionary. It's possibly seen everybody else outside as a threat. So nationalism in itself has got good and bad attributes. I mean,
right.
We can see things. I always saw the United States being blended together. What kept us as a nation, I never seen it as a racial thing. I never did. I just saw what actually our allowance for freedom, our yearning for freedom, and try to put that on other people. And horrifically, it was done with exporting democracy. May occurred in other areas, or how it manifested in other places was good or bad. But that's what I always saw. What unified us was a common language, and we had a rule of law that we all felt had to live under. And that's what I saw as being an American. I mean, I never saw it with a house in the suburbs with a white picket fence. Those materialistic things, I never considered. When I was growing up, I was already amongst a lot of ethnic people. And they all had we all have similar houses. We all lived in the same neighborhood. Nobody else is a stellar compared to the others. They're pretty much in the same standard, price range and the same probably quality of building being built or whatever. But what always kept me identified as an American is that you had these ideas. We had aspirations, and we had a goal in mind when we first started. No other country ever had. Mm-hmm. And that's where I always said and maybe there's some elements of that. Maybe there are some people going to see this, But then again, it seems to be those who are most dominant, who are most loudmouth, who are more violent, seen emerge all the time. That's right. It's like Gresham's law, in economics. It's like bad, cheap money pushes out good money, or money is back. It's like it's gold. If it's gold, it's going to be bought out because it's going to be overwhelmed by the silver or the other types of metals out there, the baser metals. So, I mean, that's with ideals. Ideas seem to the higher ideas seem to get pushed aside really quickly, I mean, how many people what is it, the guy who wrote The Jungle, Upton Sinclair, he said he aimed for the people's hearts with that book, and he hit their stomachs, because basically what was the result is not like, let's improve the conditions of the poor people working there. The bulk of it's like, let's pass purity laws, because we don't want to make sure we're not eating filth. But still good came out of it. But it was the visceral rather than the emotional or the connectability to other humans. I mean, that seemed to be lost, but still a good game. It came from it. It wasn't totally, it wasn't totally devoid of any good effects. So, okay. But see this book right here though. How many pages would you say this was in printed form?
It's 49. Oh yeah, just about the troll army thing. I think that's a phenomenon that's also anti-democratic, and we really need to take this troll army thing seriously. Like the idea that public figures can have these armies of internet trolls to harass their political opponents or journalists who are asking the wrong questions. I think that once we have that going on, that we're not really a democracy. It's like if they had gangs of people going out and beating up their opponents, like posses like that or something like that. I don't think that would be allowed, and I don't think they should be allowed to sort of harness these internet troll armies the way they are. And I don't, I guess we have free speech, and I'm not quite sure exactly what laws should be passed or what should be done about it, but I think that's a real threat to our freedom.
So yeah, I think there's always what we call trolls out there. I mean,
mm-hmm.
But usually were some kind of diehard. It was amongst the journalistic elite or the people who were like partisan political writers or observers and stuff who would write columns. But now the availability, it's a good thing and a bad thing. It is the social media has allowed everybody to say something. Mm-hmm. And now also the thing is, you got to be very careful what you say, because you might be innocuous. You might be just simply asking a question or objecting because you have this knee-jerk response to something. But now you got people out there who are going to try to find out where you live and try to harass you. So the possibility for bullying and for terrible things to happen is much greater.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't want to. I certainly don't want to see. Oh, you can't say this, but they can, because I've seen that happen already. They try to eliminate this person from saying it, but the group that's just as bad saying something in return, they're never even addressed. They're never addressed. They just very picky and choosy of who they're dressing down for their actions or for what their thoughts are. So I mean, we're living in a time like the Chinese say, "May you live in interesting times." I mean, the internet and the social media, the interconnectability of everybody is giving us this both blessings and curses. But I mean, we're just sitting here talking for a few minutes just out of this book, and the thing is, what I was amazed by that you basically took things that are coming about. And as I started reading more articles on it, you actually started getting, I don't know if you had read the same articles or not, but you saw something you had to speak out about that other people who are more like lesser known or even further removed for the average population. They're like political scientists. That's what they specialize in. They were seeing many of the same warning signs that you and the concerns you have. That's what I thought was cool about you. Is
I think they're more known than I am, so I'm drawing upon other people's. I have pages and pages of credits in my book too. So like these aren't all just my own original ideas. Like I draw upon ideas from other people too. So.
Well, my point is being that basically you're a specialist. You're a specialist is in music. That's how you make your living. But you also have this ability to like draw things and see patterns or something like that are something to be concerned about, where most people would just basically they're more passive or they're not as active mentally, and would see all the same things and just wouldn't even have a consideration for any of it. That's what I think is remarkable. Yeah.
Okay, I guess I do like to look for patterns, and I'm a conspiracy theorist to a large degree, so I might be more willing to see things being related where other people might not be willing to see them as being connected. So.
Well, anyway, I'm going to wrap this up here. Now you can get this book, and I'll put up some of the other books here too, so people can see your past efforts here. All these are available on Amazon, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Now you don't drive around with a box of these and sell them out of the back of the car.
No,
do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's say this newest book. Well, it's available on CreateSpace.com, but it at least will be available on Amazon. I haven't checked if it's available yet, but if it isn't yet available, it will be in the next few days. So.
And there's 7 books up there, titles, by the way. So that's quite a bit. Plus, you also have a CD that's available out there through Amazon as well.
Right. Yeah.
And the name of that is?
Tribe Tales.
Tribe Tales, okay. And that's and also, could they go through the iTunes and get that any place?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So we got to bring this up because that's the role of being here. So anyway, one of the reasons anyway. People, so if you get a chance and if you want to be considered, maybe this is a good launching point. This little book from her gives you maybe a launching point to maybe come up with different conclusions, or this maybe allows you to start seeing maybe the possibility of a threat. Because a lot of times, let's face it, when everybody alludes to the Hitler and the Nazis, and some people are just horrified that it happened. Well, more observant people actually knew that something like that was going to happen. That some people knew this conditions were right for this to be happening. So if you can, being forewarned is forearmed. So maybe there's something in there if you just we all start asking the right questions, maybe we can possibly offset some real negative consequences.
Yeah.
So thanks again for showing up, and I wish you the best. And anybody, like I said, you should see these. You should see the 7 titles up here, and go to Amazon if any of them strikes your fancy. Please order them. And also, how can they contact you?
Probably through my friend me on Facebook, Facebook page.
Okay. Thank you very much, Laurel.
Yeah,
and nice seeing you again.
Thank you.